Hey guys, so the purpose of this video is to help anybody who's a medical student or around the level of a medical student to get familiar with what an EKG is, kind of the basic science behind it. I don't want to go too in depth into like the physiology of how an EKG is recorded. But at the end of this video, I want you to feel fairly comfortable understanding what an EKG is, why we even do it, and most importantly, what the EKG tells you and what you can actually gather from an EKG clinically to help your patients. So what I'm going to be doing, I've done a couple of videos like this before where I walk through a website. It's an open access medical website called Life in the Fast Lane. You can go to litfl.com, which is lifeinthefastlane.com, and it'll present you with this website right here. And what you're going to do is go to the top row on your computer. It looks a little different on the phone. You can click ECG, which stands for electrocardiogram. You'll also see it shown as EKG, which is the German spelling electrocardiogram with a K. In America, we usually call it an EKG. ECG and EKG are kind of like interchangeable. You can say EKG to kind of stick with tradition, like we often do in medicine, or you can say ECG if you want to go by the American spelling or the English spelling. Either one, it's up to you. You're going to see both in your life, so it doesn't really matter. Just pick one and stick with it. Most people are going to know what EKG is, though, and ECG is a little bit harder to understand, like over a phone or something. Could get complicated with EEG maybe. So typically just say EKG. So we're going to go here on the EKG subheading. We're going to click ECG Basics. This website refers to it as ECG. So the first thing we're going to do is go to ECG Rate. So as you guys may know already, what an EKG is it's an electrocardiogram. So electro is electricity, cardio is your heart, and gram is a recording. So this is a recording of the electrical activity of your heart. It's pretty straightforward. The physiology behind how it actually records it and how your heart generates those electrical conductions that then get translated onto paper, it's kind of complex. I'm not going to get into all that. What I'm going to get into is kind of just the important, straightforward basics, and I'll go a little bit more advanced whenever I feel is necessary. I'm a third-year medical student. I really love EKGs, and I study them a lot on my, kind of as a hobby. It's just something I really enjoy. I don't know a ton. I don't know as much as doctors do, so I'm just going to give you what I know. So on this first website, we're looking at ECG Rate Interpretation. So what you're going to see here is these boxes, and this can be a little confusing if you've never seen it before. If you look at an actual 12 lead, you're going to see a bunch of squiggly lines, which we'll talk about soon. But you're going to see that they're printed over a grid. It's kind of like a bigger grid, and then within the bigger grid, there's smaller boxes. It's just lots of boxes. So there's these big boxes right here, and then you have these little boxes in between the big boxes. So these boxes on a horizontal axis represent time. So as you read the EKG from left to right, just like a book, that's basically your heart's rhythm over time. Now the whole EKG is basically a 10-second strip. And if you go up and down on the y-axis, that is millivolts, which is basically the amplitude of the waves of electricity that you're recording. Now, these can vary a little bit. Typically, you're going to see a speed of 25 millimeters per second, which means that when you record the EKG, the print speed, it's actually machine printing, it's going to print at 25 millimeters per second. Now, you don't have to get too confused on what that means, but what that translates to is in the boxes, one of these bigger boxes that has 5 small boxes in between, one big box is 0.2 seconds. So 5 of these big boxes, so here's a big box right here. So 1 box, 2 box, 3 box, 4 box, 5 box, that's 1 full second. So 5 big boxes is 1 full second. Now, if each of these big boxes is 0.2 seconds, then you can imagine that these 5 little boxes, each one is going to represent 0.04 seconds, because 5 times 0.04 is 0.2. So in summary, 1 big box is 0.2 seconds, 1 little box is 0.04 seconds, 5 big boxes is 1 full second. Now, as far as the millivolts go on the y-axis, don't worry too much about that. Just know that each little box is considered 1 millivolt. And there's some criteria for different arrhythmias and things that you'll need to understand the millivolt criteria, but it doesn't matter yet. Just know that 1 little box is 1 millivolt, like 10 little boxes vertically would be like 10 millivolts. All right, so paper speed we already kind of talked about. I don't want to get too much into this, just know that there are different ways you can print it. Like if it's a really fast rhythm, for example, you could slow down the paper speed. So it would be like 50 millimeters per second. So you could like interpret it a little bit better. Instead of the beats being so close together, you could like spread them out a little bit. but that's like really advanced stuff, so don't worry about paper speed. So as far as calculating rate goes, which is just the amount of times your heart is beating per minute, you can calculate that just by like feeling their pulse. But this is an EKG, so we want to be able to calculate the rate from the EKG. Now, it's going to tell you the rate at the top typically, but I don't like, counting on the computer interpretation in order to determine the interpretation or the intervals. You're going to want to calculate this stuff by yourself typically, especially rate. It's such a simple thing. It's really important too. So what you can do is, well, one thing, here's a picture of a normal EKG. I just Googled it real quick. So like I said, the EKG is a 10-second strip. So what you could do is just count every heartbeat and then multiply it by 6, because it's a 10-second strip. So like you can do this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times 6, 72. So this heart rate's about 72, plus or minus like 5. Who cares? This is a normal heart rate. Normal is 60 to 100-ish. So that's it for now. But there's also a trick we can use to calculate it more quickly. It's, I don't know what you call it, the 300 rule, I guess. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna find a QRS complex, which I know we haven't talked about. This is a P wave, this is a QRS, and we have a T wave. We'll get into those later. But this big spike, it's called a QRS complex. This is like where your ventricles are actually contracting. And so you're gonna find one of those that lines up on one of those big boxes. So there's little boxes in here, if you zoom in, and these are the big boxes, these darker lines. So I'm gonna pick this beat right here. You can pick any beat you want. I'm gonna pick this one right here because this QRS complex lines up directly on this big box. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna count big boxes. And you're gonna have to memorize this series of numbers. It is not hard to do. You just like say it a few times and you'll be fine. So the numbers are 300, 150, 100, 75, 60. 300, 150, 100, 75, 60. Now what we're doing is we're finding this QRS complex that lines up on one of these big boxes, and we're just counting big boxes with those numbers. So this is gonna make sense in a second, I promise. It's not hard. So we just count 300, 150, 100, 75, 60. Doing it again, starting here, 300, 150, 100, 75, 60. Now remember earlier I said that if we counted all of them in this 10-second strip, multiplied by 6 to get the full minute, we counted 75-ish. Now using this method, or we said 72-ish, I think. Using this method, 300, 150, 100, 75, 60 would be over here. So it's closer to 75. So it's like 70-ish. So it's the same rate we calculated. This is a really good tool. Now, what do the other numbers mean, like 300, 150? So those are the beats per minute. So imagine this QRS complex was here. And let's say we had another QRS complex right here, like they're right next to each other. That means, like, you can imagine the EKG is printing out and the QRS complexes are hitting right next to each other. That's a really fast heart rate. So if the QRS complexes were this close together, that's a heart rate of 300 beats per minute. Like, that's super tachycardic. Your patient would look awful. Now imagine the QRS complex was here. So 300, 150, heart rate of 150. It's pretty fast. Can be normal in exercise. It could be abnormal depending on the arrhythmia, which we'll get into later. But that would be really fast. Let's say it was 300, 150, 100. They're this far apart. That's 100 beats per minute, etc. So that's just a quick way for you to calculate the rate. Hopefully that makes sense. Just remember those numbers: 300, 150, 100, 75, 60. It goes beyond that too, but if your patient's got a heart rate under 60, you should just be, counting it a different way anyways. So that's pretty much it that I want to talk about on the rates page. These are just the normal ranges right here. When you think about heart rates, whether you're doing an EKG interpretation, you're doing peripheral pulse, you're listening to them with your stethoscope, you should think of it as slow, fast, or normal. If you're thinking about rate, rhythm's a different story. For rate, is it slow, is it fast, or is it normal? Or if you want to add on to that, is it really slow or is it really fast? So for me, well, for everyone, normal is 60 to 100. Tachycardia is over 100. Bradycardia is under 60. When I taught EMT students, I like to add the very fast and very slow. If your heart rate's 58, yes, it's bradycardia, but like 58 is fine. Like, unless it's an arrhythmia that we can talk about later, typically a heart rate of 58 is fine. My resting heart rate's well under 58 when I sleep. Does that mean I'm like really ill? No. I like to think of very slow or severely bradycardic as under 40. Typically your heart rate should never be under 40, even if you're really fit. I mean, it can be. You can get like a sinus bradycardia under 40, but that's really slow. Now, tachycardia, over 100, if your heart rate's like 110, 120, you could be perfectly stable, you're just sick. You could be exercising, your heart rate could be 120, 130, much higher. But if you go over like 150, that's really fast. Like it definitely can go over that when you're exercising, but I would classify over 150 as really fast, not just fast, if that makes sense. So I like to have it as normal, fast, slow, really fast, really slow. I think it's just a good way to think about it. And then these are the heart rates right here for children. They're different. I have to reference these from time to time. Just know that in kids, their heart rate's going to be higher. If you walk into a room and there's a baby with a heart rate of 150, they're not automatically in distress. They just have a tiny heart that has to beat faster to maintain cardiac output as a child. So just look at these as much as you can. Eventually, it'll kind of come into your head more fluently.